Good day, everyone. Good day. It's been a few days since we saw each other last. We have gone through the holidays in the meantime. I hope you have all gotten through a nice Christmas. You have gotten some nice presents. You have given also some nice presents. I also hope you passed through your several gatherings and meetings with your family and relatives just fine. I hope you haven't revealed your power level to them. Luckily for me, a couple of my cousins got COVID, so we had to limit our gathering. I just went on to my parents' house, so it was just me and my restricted family to our Christmas Eve and Christmas dinners and whatnot. So it was nicer than expected. For the record, the two cousins with COVID are just fine. No worries, unfortunately. So what we have to go over through today, I decided to do something different. First of all, I'm also looking up into my backlog of games as we go through the holidays. There isn't much to do in WoW anyways. The new initial introduction of the Legion Time Walking and the Mage Tower Challenge is now gotten past a couple of weeks. We are getting to the third week of this event, so there is only 1 week left. I guess there isn't as much of an excitement about it either, so I'm looking at other games to play, to try out, to see that I haven't had the time to try out in the past few weeks. But also, as we approach the end of the year, I thought about doing something cooler, something fun, at the very least for me. That is to go over my favorite specs, my most liked specs, because this is going to be served as a catalog for the next hundreds of videos, so that whenever I say something about any spec, you will be able to say, well, of course, Izen is saying this. He put this spec into the shit tier. He doesn't like it at all. So that the next time I tell you that in the next patch there is going to be this flavor of the month spec because it's super good, you will be able to say, well, of course, Izen said this. It's one of his favorite specs. He's totally biased. You see, that's the reason why I like to make this type of video, so that I can lay it bare for everyone to see which are my favorite specs. Now, what your favorite specs are might be something completely subjective. Perhaps you like a spec because it can look very good with Transmogs, because perhaps it sounds very nice. You just like the sound of Mortal Strike and Bladestorm, so you like Arms Warrior. That's it. That's your entire reasoning as to why you like Arms. Or perhaps you like the rotation. Perhaps you like the damage profile, or how they heal as a spec, or how they tank. There can be plenty of different reasons why you would get to be interested and intrigued by a certain spec. And just like you, I also have many different reasons as to why I like and not like certain specs. So, time is short. Eventually I have to go out and buy some supplies for the end of the year, because I already see people starting to amass in my supermarket of choice, starting to take everything away from me, so I have to move quickly. So, we have our tier list over here, we have all of our specs over here, and I'm gonna pick them out completely randomly without any particular reason in order. So, we're starting with Red Paladin, because, I don't know, it stood out to me. It's the only purple icon, basically, so to me, Red Paladin goes into the A tier. I actually mained Red Paladin before, both in terms of, raiding and doing Mythic Plus, so it was one of my choices as one of my more interesting melee specs. I think Red has one of the more unique themes when it comes to melee DPS. The whole paladin, gold, silver, eagles, lions, and all these kind of themes around being a crusader, about being a devout religious character. It looked cool. It looks cool. So for that alone, I liked Paladin. I like the tier sets. I like the the transmogs you can have as a Red Paladin, and I also like the rotation. I think it's decent, it's cool. It's satisfying to use Templar's Verdict, it's satisfying to use Divine Storm, so I kind of like the way it smoothens out when you play Red Paladin. I like how you scale with haste and the rotation gets faster and faster deeper into the expansion, so I think it was a pretty nice spec to play, to use, etc, etc. So that goes into our A tier. Next we are picking out Affliction Warlock. Affliction Warlock goes into the D tier. I thought about putting it into the F tier, although I kind of admit that recently it has gotten better, so just for this expansion I'm gonna save them the embarrassment of being the first spec being put in the lowest tier. Affliction, I have not liked Affliction ever since the days of Vanilla. And expansion by expansion, not much changed. I just don't like the feeling of being a ranged caster and constantly having to use instant spells. In the case of Affliction, it was dots, a lot of them over time. So, you know, as I said, this expansion has gotten slightly better. You know, you get to use Malefic Rapture, you get to use Haunt more. I mean, for a while you've been using Haunt, but at least you have more casted spells. It feels a little bit better, but still, I just don't like the way it plays. It does have some pretty good Transmog sets. It does have some pretty cool, you know, atmosphere and aesthetics around the spec itself, but once we go down to the actual playstyle, I just don't enjoy Affliction too much. After Affliction, we have Arcane, and Arcane does actually get the privilege of being the first spec that goes into the F tier. Arcane has been in this place for me pretty much since forever. It has been playing very, very similarly for a long time, and I just don't like the way it plays. It does have the cool feel around being, you know, playing with the arcane type of magic. It's kind of cool, but, you know, again, similar to Affliction, the spec to me just plays too badly to be interesting, to be exciting, especially when you have other mage specs that comparatively are doing better, for me at least. So I never quite got into Arcane Mage. Jumping over, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, to tanks, just to pick the complete opposite of Arcane, because Blood DK for me is in the S tier. That's right, for me, DK and Blood is the better, the more enjoyable and fun tank to play over time. I did play Blood DK as well for a while, for a couple of expansions, not as the main spec, but the tank specs to play in as sort of like a second character. I enjoyed it very much as far as tanking goes, so I always thought it was amongst the better and more enjoyable specs. I like how, you know, how different Blood Death Knight plays compared to other tank, its type of defenses being around healing himself. The series, the vast series of cooldowns you can use as a Blood DK tank is also kind of cool. Yeah, sure, it hasn't been in the best position as of late, especially with Mythic Plus in mind, but I still think it's a very cool spec to play. Moving over, this time it's time to introduce a healer. I am gonna put Holy Priest into the C tier, into the smack average middle-ish range. I like the general idea of Holy Priest, the high throughput type of healer. I just get annoyed about the lack of things Holy Priest has, particularly the strong cooldowns for the raid. Being a healer in the raid myself, I just feel like this is too big of a miss for Holy Priest. It does have some quite diverse type of healing genres you can go over time. Unlike, for example, Arcane or Affliction, which have been very similar for a long time, Holy Priest actually has changed over time the type of style it uses to heal. You know, sometimes it was full-on renew spam, sometimes it was a lot of prayer of healing spam. Now it's down to a specific legendary spamming heal. So it also did change over time quite a bit. It was quite diverse over time, but the deficits, the negatives it has kind of prevent it from going higher than more or less the middle for me. Another spec that for me never really goes past the middle anyways is Arms Warrior. The first spec in the alphabet goes into the D tier as well. I just don't like the simplicity of arms. I understand why some people can like the simplicity of arms, but it's just not for me. It's just way too straightforward. This is clearly Blizzard's intent. You know, arms has been this simple for this long. It hasn't really changed drastically over time anyways, so this is quite obviously the style that Blizzard wants to go for arms, and I accept it, I understand it, it's fine, but it's just not really for me. Conversely, I'm gonna put immediately after Arms Fury Warrior and put it in B. Fury Warrior has changed a little bit more over time. It has actually gotten a few more reworks in how it plays compared to Arms. It has gotten some changes. Now it plays much more fluid, much more quick and fast. The GCD of Fury gets faster and faster, similar to Arms. The difference is that Fury also has more things to use, more stuff to press. I think it's just more enjoyable. The loop, the compulsion loop, the gameplay loop of your Fury Warrior around your rage and your rampage to dump the rage is I think, to me, more interesting than Arms. Let's now take a trip back to tanks and pick Protection Paladin. Protection Paladin goes into the A tier. It is also the other tank I enjoy the most. When it comes to tanking, it has this niche of being a tank that does a lot of damage. It's been a thing ever since Mythic Plus was implemented into the game, and tank damage became a thing people started noticing, people started putting a lot of stocks into, and that was more or less the niche of Prot Paladin. It wasn't the best in many other areas of tanking, but damage is something they did quite well. So much like Red Paladin, I like the theme, the style of Prot Paladin and the way it tanks, its rotation and its abilities, so I always enjoyed it as a tank. Talking about a tank I don't enjoy nearly as much is Vengeance Demon Hunter. So Vengeance Demon Hunter goes into the C tier. It is still not that bad. I think it's pretty enjoyable overall. It has a pretty unique style, certainly, as far as tanking goes. It has some unique stuff you have to play around with. For Vengeance, I just never got too much into it, even when I tried playing Havoc and Vengeance back in Legion, back when Demon Hunter was released. I never quite got into Demon Hunter. It's also a very new type of spec, so it missed a lot of feel and atmosphere around it. It was very fresh, not a lot of transmog available to it. It was clearly made for Zoomers and overloaded in its kit, much more Havoc was, but Vengeance still a little bit as well. So to me, it never struck out as the most interesting tank anyways, but it's definitely not one of the worst for me. Talking about one of the worst, actually, I have to go for Prot Warrior, because Prot Warrior is my second spec into the F tier. I really don't enjoy the way Prot Warrior works, even after the rework, even after the implementation of something like Ignore Pain as the active mitigation of choice for Protection Warrior. I never quite enjoyed the playstyle. I never quite enjoyed spamming Thunderclap. I never quite enjoyed the way, just the average way it plays out. So I never quite got into Prot Warrior. Now, we have stuck with tanks a little bit too much. Let's go back to some DPS now. Let's go back to something like Enhancement Shaman. So, Enhancement Shaman goes into the C tier for me. I have this issue with Enhancement where it's very unique, it's very flavorful. It has a lot... It has a lot of different ways for you to play the spec. It has also gotten through quite a few reworks and changes over time, and every time it kind of looked cool, it kind of looked fun to play, but overall it just wasn't as satisfying. Sometimes when a spec feels cool and feels nice, if it's also not powerful, if it's also not strong for a long amount of time, it kind of starts feeling not as nice, not as cool to play. Enhancement really is one of the specs that has lacked a clear moment in the spotlight for an extended period of time. Many other specs have gotten this moment over time. Many other specs have been the flavor of the month for quite a long time, but Enhancement just never quite felt it got that spot. So to me, it kind of felt always like a middling type of spec. Talking about a spec that is a little bit more than middling, at the very least for me, is Demonology Warlock. So Demonology Warlock is gonna kind of going to the A tier, although there is a question mark here, because of course it's more about the reworked Demonology style. The early stages, Demonology was barely even a spec. It was just there to take some defensive stuff for Warlocks for PvP. That's all it was as a spec. Then over time it got more fleshed out, and then we've gotten reworks, and now it plays much better. It's much more enjoyable. So technically, if I had to take a total average since vanilla, it would probably end up somewhere into the low C tier, high D tier if I had to take the average. But I'm gonna just count the most recent version of demo, which is much more fleshed out than the older, and it's also much better. Pretty much pet-only style of demo, where you pretty much are just a battler for your pets and you don't really do much damage yourself, is also not for everyone. It's not something that lots of people will enjoy, but I do like the way it plays, so I like the new version of this demo spec. Talking about another spec I enjoy is Elemental. Elemental I am putting more into the B tier though. So I actually mained Elemental as well for a couple of tiers, a little bit more than a couple of tiers. So I like how Elemental plays, I like the rotation and the smoothness. I I don't like too much the weaknesses of Elemental. Perhaps I'm a little bit more picky. I'm a little bit more strict because I mained it, right? So I'm a little bit more annoyed by the thing it didn't do. So it kind of lacked the burst damage, the ability to do high burst DPS on demand, which was a very glaring problem for them, for Mythic Plus, even for raid encounters. It was lagging behind a few other specs because of it. Recently in Shadowlands, it was given a slightly better niche in terms of even stronger AoE than before, so it's gotten a little bit better, and it looks like it will be a little bit better in 9.2 as well. But for me, on average, it's a solid, decent spec that is enjoyable to play. Talking about another spec I enjoyed quite a bit was Assassination Rogue. So, Assassination Rogue is another spec I mained back in Legion when I was playing Rogue. It was the start. The first half of the expansion was as Assassination. The latter half was more towards Subtlety. I enjoy the way it plays. I enjoyed the high IQ style of having to pool your energy, having to prepare your Rapture, your Garrote, having to use it with your snapshotted increased damage, talents, and artifact weapon traits. Back then it was, perhaps, I think, compared to what it is now, it was more complex. It was more satisfying to pull off a nice ramp up and nice burst damage, or consistent damage rather, with Assassination than today. Today, I would probably put it one tier below. And also Assassination, similar to some other specs, is a more unique type of spec. It plays with much fewer APM, actions per minute, much fewer button presses than many other specs. It's not a haste-based spec. You're not going to press buttons that much faster, deeper into the expansion like you would for a warrior, for example, so it's also a unique type of spec in that sense, but I always enjoyed that style. I enjoyed alternating between a spec that can play fast, like Red Paladin, for example, and a spec that can play much more slowly, like Assassination. Now, let's talk about something like Survival. So, many people will say, izen totally doesn't like Survival, it's totally one of his most hated specs, he always shits on Survival, so he's gonna put it into the F tier. Well, I'm actually here to prove you, right, actually, because yeah, it's in the F tier. I don't like Survival. Perhaps I'm a little bit salty. I did used to play Hunter as well, and I did like quite a bit Survival. The last iteration of a very good Survival build back in Mists of Pandaria was great, and then it was turned into a melee spec. And since then, I don't like the new Survival. That's just it. I just don't like melee Survival. That's all there is to it. If it was Mists Survival, I would have put it into the A tier, A+, even Wrath or TBC, still high, but the melee version, not really. So following up Survival, I have to pick up Feral. Because Feral, just like Survival, you're gonna be saying, it's gonna be in the F tier as well, Well, no, okay, for real now, unlike Survival, Feral is actually going to be... actually, it's still going to be into the F tier, fuck. Yeah, I don't enjoy Feral either. I played Druid as well back in Warlords. It was more of a Resto Druid, but I was trying Feral as well. I always had this problem with Feral. Feral is just... It just feels so annoying to not have any burst, to always be super slow and forced, gated by your dots, by your ramp of dots over time. You always lack any sort of AoE burst, single target burst. You lack anything that any party or raid would want you for, like any powerful raid cooldown. You don't really have any unique thing by yourself. It just never felt like a good spec to me to play, to enjoy. Plus, I always don't even like playing while I'm shapeshifted. I don't like not seeing the Transmog, for example. It's always something that bummed me out about Feral, because at least for balance, you have the glyphs. You can still look like a normal character with your Transmog, but Feral can't even have that, so, I just never quite enjoyed it. Talking about a spec I enjoyed way more is Resto Shaman, which of course goes into the S tier. The current spec I am playing, and I've been playing for well over one expansion now, it's my favorite healer spec, of course, with some caveats. Healers have changed over time, multiple times, so there are going to be different versions of different healers that perhaps I enjoyed more, but recently, at the very least, in recent times, it is the healer I enjoy the most. I like it, I like the flavor, I like the style, I like the way it heals, so it was the option for me to go and use it as a main because of these reasons. Talking about older iteration of healers, there is also Discipline. which is now going to be into the C tier. You know, Discipline is very similar to Demonology in the sense that for something like 3 expansions in a row or 3 versions of the game in a row, it wasn't even a spec. It was just there to put some talents in, it was just there for PvP, it was just there for buffs, and not really a spec of its own. It started getting into its own by the end of Cataclysm, and then into Mists, it was a full-on, fleshed-out OP healer spec because of its absorbs. That's when it was shining the most, back during the early iteration of Spirit Shell, the way it used to play out. Then it went through some changes, it turned into a power shield spamming type of spec, which was awful, and now recently it has gotten into a very complicated, a very time-based, big cooldown reliant type of healer. So it has gone up and down over time for me. Sometimes it was into the F tier, unplayable. Sometimes it was into the S tier, very, very good. On average, I would say it's more or less in the middle. It's more or less average for me. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a few times. Nowadays, I enjoy it a little bit less, but I still see a future where the rotation changes up enough for me to enjoy it a lot more again. Now, let me quickly sift through some of the specs that I enjoy not as much. I don't find them too appealing to me. One is Destruction Warlock. Destruction has been playing very similarly for a long time, and I just don't enjoy it. I think the Destruction is a very similar thing to Arms. It's like a ranged version of Arms in how simple and how smooth it is. It can be enjoyed by many players because of how smooth and how nice it feels to just continuously use the same thing over time, but it's just not the style for me. Another spec that fills this niche for me is Frostmage. Frostmage with its Ice Lance, procs, and Brain Freeze and Fingers of Frost reliance. I've never quite enjoyed it as a spec as a whole. Alternatively, I enjoy Fire Mage a little bit more because of the way, the new, I guess, although nowadays it's not really new, the new way to play with Combustion and your burst window within Combustion. I think it closes out the rotation for your spec quite nicely as Fire. It is, to me, the more enjoyable of the Mage specs. It has been for a while. Another spec, at this time, that I enjoy a little bit more is Subtlety. Because Subtlety, much like Assassination, is one of my more enjoyed melee DPS specs. I main Subtlety as well. It's very nice, it's very enjoyable. Over time it has changed a little bit. I remember back in the days of Legion to now, it's not too different. It still has its Shadow Dance window with Shadow Strikes. A few changes here and there, but it's still very nice to play as a spec. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I have to finish out now the rogue specs because I put and I sang the praises of Assassination and Subtlety, so now it's time to bitch about Outlaw. Outlaw to me is into the F tier. I think many people will be surprised because Outlaw has been quite popular for quite a few expansions for Mythic Plus. It's been a quite played spec, and I just don't like it. It's not even about a boomer complaint about enjoying Combat Rogue more, which, by the way, I did. I did enjoy Combat Rogue more, but even the new version, the pirate version of Outlaw, I just don't like the way it plays. I never quite liked, this ADHD Adderall infused super fast play style of just spamming Sinister Strike and Pistol Shot and using Dispatch as a finisher over and over and over and over. It's just way too straightforward, way too streamlined of a spec for me to enjoy. After that, it's another spec that has disappointed me over time, which is Beast Mastery, that goes into the D tier. I used to main Hunter for over 2 expansions, or rather 2 versions of the game from vanilla to TBC, and I liked the Beast Mastery quite a bit. Back then, I still enjoyed it after, when I kept playing Hunter even in Mists, but recently Blizzard started a campaign of simplifying Hunter more and more over time, so Beast Mastery took quite a big hit in terms of enjoyment for me on how it was simplified. However, it wasn't as bad, it wasn't as hurt as Marksmanship, which goes into the F tier for me. Marksmanship to me is the spec that has been simplified the worst and for the worse for me, because I don't enjoy how it has been narrowed down to a more streamlined build. I mean, to be fair, Hunter was never too much of a complicated build. Back in the days, the more difficult thing about Hunter was managing your pet. more so than managing your rotation. But still, it wasn't, if you wanted to take the whole package as the entire class, it wasn't too simple to play. It had quite a few things you could min-max. Nowadays though, Marksmanship is just very, very straightforward. I don't enjoy it too much. Let's round out and finish the tanks. We only have Druid and Monk left, so let's just pick Brewmaster. We're gonna put Brewmaster into the B tier. I enjoy Brewmaster. I don't enjoy it as much as Prot and the Blood Decay, but it's still cool. I like the very unique way it plays, the very unique style, you know, the stagger mechanic. Although it kind of hurts that the stagger mechanic is kind of broken for tanks. It's likely the strongest version, the strongest type of active mitigation out of all tanks. But for me, the reason why it stops at B tier is because I don't like Monk Transmogs too much. I don't like the races that monks can play too much either. I don't like too much the way it looks either. You know, the way the animations of the attacks as a monk work either. I appreciate the build and the rotation, but to me it always lacked the extra style, the aesthetics, the feel around the spec. I never quite enjoyed Monk too much. Lastly, of the tanks, we have Guardian. So, Guardian goes into the D tier. I have Shield for Guardian becoming the new flavor of the month tank ever since 9.0.5. It actually became true, and now Guardian is very good. That being said, I still don't enjoy it too much. It's still a trash swipe spamming machine. It's not really very enjoyable. It doesn't have that many buttons. Sure, you can min-max the spec, you can all weave or you can cut weave, you know, you can change into other forms to maximize most of the time your damage. It can be more enjoyable that way, but you know, if I take it as a tank as a whole, I just think it is and it has been too straightforward, way too simple for me to enjoy fully compared to other tanks. Now I'm gonna finish off the monks because we have Windwalker and Mistweaver left. Mistweaver goes into the C tier and Windwalker goes into the B tier. So, similar to Brewmaster, I still don't like the feel and the aesthetics and the transmogs and the animations of these specs. I do enjoy Windwalker more. I enjoy the rotation of Windwalker and the playstyle of Windwalker more. Mistweaver is more average to me. It is more unique than other healers. It heals a little bit more differently and more uniquely, which is more enjoyable, but overall, I never quite got into Mistweaver. As for myself, another spec, even more so, that I could never quite get into is Resto Druid. Resto Druid to me goes into the F tier because of its playstyle. That's pretty much all. Druid to me as a more enjoyable aesthetic and feel and style, but just spamming rejuvenation year after year after year after year. I appreciate the resolve and the resilience of main Resto Druid players for doing this, but I just cannot feel to do that as a player. So I never quite liked the way Resto Druid played. So since we are here, we can finish off the Druids and pick up Balance. Balance goes into the, I guess I'm gonna say C tier, average-ish. I never quite got into Balance Druid. Even when I was playing Druid itself, I never quite liked the ping-pong left and right, arcane and nature bouncing of the way Balance played. Nowadays, I think it's a little bit better. It's a little bit smoothened out and straightened out. It probably a little bit improved, but overall, I don't think it's too enjoyable for me as a spec. Another spec that fits the same category of being sort of middling, but a little bit more than Balance Druid is going to be Shadow Priest. Goes into the B tier. Much like a few of these specs like Demo Warlock, if I had to take the entirety of the existence of Shadow Priest, it would probably be a little bit lower. Shadow Priest has gone through a lot of iterations, a lot of changes over time. Not least recently, the change with Insanity, the change with the different forms of Shadow Priest. Now they got away with Insanity as a proper way to play, and now it's just a cooldown, so it keeps changing over time. I think the current iteration is quite good. Probably, at the very least, if we stay into the raid, the Surrender to Madness version from Legion was perhaps more cool, more extreme, but still cool. But I still think it's a quite enjoyable spec to play. It does suffer, not as badly like Feral Druid, from the fact that they lacked for a long time, they lacked burst, they lacked any sort of quick ways to do damage. Now this is not nearly as bad as before, so they also got better in that department. So overall for me, it's a more enjoyable spec. Of course, then you have the feel, the aesthetic, the style of Shadow Priest, which is always very cool. It's always very edgy. So I like the spec as a whole. Another spec I enjoy overall is Holy Paladin. I like the way it heals. I like the new, the new special thing about this type of spec that is also doing damage while it heals. That is also a melee spec healing. So I like overall the style that goes behind Holy. After all, it's in the same tier as Prot Paladin and Red Paladin. So I clearly enjoy how Paladin looks and plays overall. We have only 3 specs left now, and 2 of these are going to end up very close to each other, because it's going to be Frost Decay into the D tier and Havoc into the D tier, both of them. Not quite the same reasons, but the rotation of both specs I don't enjoy too much. I think they are way too simple and way too repetitive. Demon Hunter has had some chances with momentum to make it a more enjoyable type of spec of playstyle, but not for long, not for enough time. So to me overall, Havoc is not too enjoyable to play. I think it's way too edgy. I said Shadow Priest was kind of cool because it's also edgy, but Havoc just goes overboard. It just goes way too much into the edge meter for me to enjoy. Then we have the last spec out of all, which isn't being left for last because it's special or anything. It's Unholy. Unholy got into the B tier. I enjoy the way Unholy looks, first of all. Much like the other DK specs, I think DK as a whole has a pretty good style to play. I enjoy the theme about being this undead melee necromancer type of spec, summoning ghouls and monsters from the dead. It's very cool. The rotation is a little bit lacking. It's not that great. In this same tier we have Windwalker, which has a much cooler rotation than Unholy, but still I think it's serviceable. Overall, I think it's enjoyable to play Unholy. Back when I was playing DK as well, I did play Unholy. It was pretty nice, and I like the spec overall. So after we have gone through all of the specs, this is the final result. Now you can save this, and so you can remember the next time we go through the raid meta and the Mythic Plus meta. Anything I say about any spec, you can invalidate it based on where I put these specs in my preference list, in my preference tier list. I could ask you guys which is your tier list for favorite specs, but I don't want you to write an essay. So instead, I'm just gonna ask you which are your favorite specs overall and which are your least favorite specs overall. The reason could be anything. It could be because the players you have seen playing that spec are super annoying, so by proxy you started hating the spec itself, perhaps because it looks super cool, or it plays very nicely to you, or it has a very nice type of damage profile that you enjoy. Any reason is fine for you to enjoy one of the specs. So with this, we can take a break at the 28th of December on Tuesday, the reset day for NA, and I guess tomorrow for EU. We'll see each other again probably. Thank you guys as usual for supporting this channel. If you want to continue doing so, you can leave a like down on the video, you can comment as well down below, and also don't forget to subscribe to the channel, but only for today, only if you have given some presents for Christmas and you have not been a greedy, slimy little shit. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, why does it always happen? Why does it snow in November and then in December it's like nothing?